Good good evening, YouTubers. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Stumble there for a second. It's Tuesday, 8 p.m., our regularly scheduled live stream. I hope everybody's doing amazing. We are here at Miami Beach. It's the dead of winter. It's actually chilled down to, I believe, the 60s. And it's kind of nice here. I know that many of you are suffering with much colder weather, so I do apologize, but it is beautiful. Winter is our best time here. As always, this is going to be a live stream, right? So it's about us talking. Otherwise, we could just do a recorded video. There's no point in a live stream. So it's all about you asking questions, me trying to respond, you making a statement, me responding to that, going back and forth. By the way, as I'm going along here, please let me know in the comments whether or not everything is working well, whether or not you can hear me. I don't see any drop frames, whether or not the audio is good as well as the video. So I know I'm working. This is all working well for us. Before we start, let's jump in to take a look at the poll. Apologize. Take a look at the poll that I posted about 24 hours ago to see what everybody wanted to talk about. Oh, sorry. Let me start the super chat here. Super chat. I apologize. The chat stream so I can see what people are saying. Marlene Peppelman. Hey, Lior. Good to see you again. Me too. What do you have for us today? That's going to be a good question. Let's take a look at the poll to see how everything is working out. What exactly we wanted to talk about here. And this is what I put up about 24 hours ago. It says the first one, which is obviously the one you guys chose, not by a huge margin, but nonetheless, FCC to remove SMS anti-discrimination standard for common carrier. And the second one was about Facebook alleged lies, the New York Times expose and the cover-up. Are there some legally actionable matters to discuss there? Let me just take a look at your comments. Sounds great. Heidi Williams, hello from Wyoming. Outstanding. Guys, if you want me to read out your comment, whether or not just to say hello or to ask a question or to say anything at all, just make sure to put an @YouTuber Law before your comment. On my end, there'll be like an orange box, so I know to read it. Usually there's lots of comments, and as a result, I can't go through them. Obviously, if you do a super chat, I will read that, but you don't have to pay or do anything. All you have to do is just put @YouTuber Law in front of your comments. You won't see it on your end, but I do see it on my end, and I will be more than happy to read everything out. We are basically, when we start, I'm going to go through a quick, maybe 10-minute discussion of the topic at hand. Afterwards, I'll open it up. So as I go along, make sure to put in your comments, because I will jump back after my 10 minutes and just go through all the comments and respond. So just throw it in. I will not miss any one of your comments in there. Con Clanseth, hello. All good AV, outstanding. Let's start the stream. So today's topic is an interesting one. Is the FCC trying to reinvigorate and permit discrimination within SMS? Up until now, we discussed many times net neutrality. In many ways, I feel that the subject has been talked to death. Definitely not something I'm particularly interested in discussing more and more. But at its heart, the issue is whether or not ISPs, the entry gates into the internet, whether or not they should be considered common carrier. A common carrier at its basic is basically somebody that's providing transmission of people, transmission of goods, transmission of data from one point to the next. As a result, should not be permitted to discriminate against people, against the products, against who you are, what you are, whether or not you're a competitor or an ally, whether or not you are from a specific region. Not only discriminate in terms of whether or not you are permitted to use the services or permit to send a product, but also whether and what kind of pricing they will be charged. So you're not discriminating in the form of pricing. So we've spoken about the net neutrality. Now, a smaller subsection of the whole net neutrality is basically deals in mobile carriers, basically mobile neutrality, whether or not mobile carriers, your AT&T or Verizon, your T-Mobile, whether or not they should be considered common carriers. Now, it was a smaller subsection. Some people have spoken about it. It wasn't at great length. Ultimately, the same kind of idea, whether or not those mobile networks should be considered common carriers, and as a result, no discrimination will be permitted on mobile network the same way that they are not permitted on landline phones. Now, a smaller subsection of that even yet, and something that has never been discussed, is SMS. Where does SMS fall in? Is SMS a network basically a telephone network and as such should be a common carrier, or is it something else? Now, to get a handle on that, let's just go back a little bit to discuss the whole concept of common carrier. We've had common carrier concept since the 1800s. Back in 1887, we had a regulation that basically determined that the railroad is a common carrier. As you can imagine, when the railroad is the primary means of transporting not only people but goods and also the mail, so the main form of communications throughout the United States, the idea would be that such a common carrier should not be permitted to discriminate, not based on who you are, what you are, whether or not you are there to compete with the railroad, whether or not you are transporting something valuable or not valuable. So the idea would be that every person from every place, I guess, within a region should be charged the same thing. There shouldn't be discrimination based on pricing. The same way when it comes to product. A pound of gold should be charged the same thing as a pound of hay when it came to transporting them. Obviously, there could be some variability given the fact that there's volume differential as well and may require more carts. Nonetheless, that's the basic principle of it. Move forward to 1934, we had the start of what we know as the FCC and the Communication Act of 1934. At that point, we focused mostly on the telephone, specifically on AT&T and the entire Bell system. The government determined that the Bell network, AT&T, as we know it, basically became a natural monopoly. A monopoly that is not something that should be stopped, but rather is the most efficient form of operation of that particular product. That product was long-distance phone calls. There were lots and lots of regional telephone companies that dealt in the last mile, basically providing regional phone service, but really we had one massive monopoly that was known as the Bell system that controlled long distance. The idea being that while, at least in 1934, there was no interest in breaking up the company or killing the monopoly itself, the idea is that as a common carrier of communication, people in all part of the country should have the ability to communicate with just about anybody else, but AT&T did not have an incentive to do so. They were investing heavily in long distance lines and didn't want to reach individual communities in kind of the rural network. The idea is that AT&T should not be able to discriminate against people by refusing to connect to their own local phone service and not providing the various phone service, even if those services are ultimately competitors, access to their long distance line. 1934. AT&T becomes a common carrier. Shortly thereafter, the government designates trucks and freight trucks as common carrier. Again, same kind of idea, transporting people, transporting product, transporting communication. That's pretty much what we have until the 1980s with the start of the growth of the internet. Wasn't really much of an issue because the internet at that point sat on top of phone lines. The idea was that just the same way if you're transmitting the idea was that just as if you were transmitting voice over line, and that's a common carrier functionality, transmitting data over those same lines should be a common carrier. That changed over time with the growth of broadband when the transmission of data separated itself from the phone line and became its own separate and standing service. There was argument about whether or not broadband is different than what phone lines were. And that really was the genesis of what we know of as net neutrality. We had in 1996 a new Telecommunication Act, which basically differentiated between different types, between Title I and Title II. Title II basically said that the phone lines are, in fact, the network, the dumb network, a pipeline where transmission of data, voices, goes from one end to the next. And as a result, the network should not be interfering with it. And people should not be discriminated based on the content of their speech. And separating that from what was Title I, which were services that were essentially connected and placed on top of the network. For example, if the phone line is Title II, you have, let's say, voicemail as being Title I. As far as your access to the telephone, your ability to speak, you cannot be discriminated against based on who you are, where you are, and what you're speaking. Then again, no such restrictions exist when it comes to the provision of services that sit on top of the network, like voicemail. Effectively, if AT&T wanted to, they can prevent you from using voicemail, even though they cannot prevent you from using their phone line to actually transmit voices. Now, where does that, how does, I apologize here, dog outside and kids playing basketball, so a lot of noise coming from the side here, which takes me out of my thoughts here. Okay, so where does SMS exactly fit in here? Is SMS essentially a dumb pipeline where one person communicates with another and the network itself is really just engaged to allow for the transmission of information? Or is it just a service that sits on top of another network, and as a result, the network, the company managing it, can actually discriminate based on whatever its reasoning is? Now, there are companies on both ends. There are parties on both ends arguing what is effectively SMS. On the one hand, you have companies and some public what do you call them? Special interest groups who say that SMS is too important, as a result must be regulated by the government. Sorry, the neighbor has a very loud motorcycle. I apologize. Though they say, basically, they point, those special interest group, those companies point to instances where networks actually discriminated against people with their SMS. There's examples of special interest groups who had their SMS privileges or services terminated. They show examples of groups like either pro or anti-abortion groups that whose services were cut off because the network did not want to carry those kind of fiery language, things that people might be opposed to, whether or not it's sent among its member or sent to people that may not have wanted to receive those messages. So there are definitely instances where the major phone companies actually stopped the provision of SMS to specific groups. There are also commercial enterprises that say, you know what, our client need our access to. One second here. I have to send a message here for, frankly, from my wife to ask people outside to stop playing basketball. I do apologize. Okay, let's see if this goes anywhere. And there are commercial enterprises that say that SMS is needed for business itself, not only because they need to communicate with their own clients, but there is also marketing need. What you might be considering spam, but the idea that we need to be able to use SMS to communicate not only to people that have asked us for information, but people that we may want to engage. And then there's arguments about how ubiquitous it is. It's everywhere. It's somewhat verified. It's one number to another, one instrument to another, and that not only commercial enterprises are relying on it, but also emergency services rely on it. And the idea is that ultimately the SMS is so important that that the networks themselves, the AT&T or Verizon, your T-Mobile, should not be in a place to ever determine whether or not somebody should have access to SMS. It's something that should be provided on a non-discriminatory basis, basically on a neutral basis, regardless of the content of the messaging. Now, this whole thing became an issue because, as you can imagine, the chairman of the FCC decided to write a blog post where he declared his opposition to that very idea. Let me put up his statement here. And this was a blog post. I believe it was posted to Medium, and it says, among other things, today's wireless messaging providers apply filtering to prevent large volumes of unwanted messages from ever reaching your phone. However, there's been an effort underway to put the successful consumer protection at risk. In 2015, a mass texting company called Twilio petitioned the FCC, arguing that wireless messaging should be classified as a telecommunication service. This may not seem like a big deal, but such a classification would dramatically curb the ability of wireless providers to use robotext blocking, anti-spoofing, and other anti-spam features. So I'm circulating a declaratory ruling that would instead classify wireless messaging as an information service. Basically saying that he's going to determine, FCC, because the FCC is entitled to make those determinations, that SMS is an information service. It is not going to be a common carrier. Basically, the government, the FCC, is not going to regulate networks that provide SMS services. Rather, each company can do as they wish. They can actually, the implication is they can decide who to provide the service and who not to, based on their own rules, not based on some non-discriminatory basis. Now, what do I think of all of that? Both sides have an argument, because in everything, and we've seen it in net neutrality, there are two sides to every single story, right? Some people believe that net neutrality is an awful thing because it kills competition. Other ones believe that it's a wonderful thing. It protects access to the networks, allows us to express ourselves. Same thing here. Some people believe that SMS is crucial to our economy. Not only is it needed commercially, it's needed from an emergency perspective, but it allows people to express themselves. Other ones are saying it's just a service provided by otherwise telecommunication services that is, while important, should not be regulated by the government. You know what? Everybody has an opinion, and I can have my opinion, but based on that opinion alone, I am not convinced that either side is necessarily correct. I do have an opinion about which one I think is more correct. What I'm disturbed by is that there is no discussion at all by the chairman of the FCC regarding what the law is. If the argument about whether or not companies should be able to stop spam, that's a discussion we can all have, and everybody agrees that SMS spamming should stop. It's not a big deal, not like email spamming, but nonetheless, it's annoying. I receive it all the time. I receive probably more spamming through SMS. I mean, not through SMS, through mobile calls more than anything else. Nonetheless, it's an interesting discussion here. But where is the discussion of why the law would classify this as a common carrier or not, whether or not this fits under Title I or Title II, saying that this is needed in order to empower AT&T and Verizon to stop spam of SMS? That's an interesting argument, but that's not the legal basis to make that determination. And to get to that point, we have to understand ultimately what the law says about mobile services here. So I want to show it to you quickly here. This is, okay, let me just pull it up 1 second. Okay, here. So in front of us is an excerpt from the 1996 Telecommunication Act, and it says on the C1A, a person engaged in the provision of a service that is a commercial mobile service shall be treated as a common carrier for the purposes of this chapter. So basically, anybody operating pull it back up. Anybody operating a mobile service should be treated as a common carrier. Now, is it or not? Well, basically, there were no clear regulations until 2015. Effectively, mobile carriers were not treated as common carriers until the Obama administration. The FCC under the Obama administration, the same time that it decided to treat ISPs as common carriers, also said that all mobile carriers are now also going to be treated as common carriers. Obviously, the current FCC reversed all that, and currently neither the ISPs nor mobile network are considered common carriers. Now, what actually determines whether or not a mobile network becomes a common carrier? Well, basically, it's if did I put it up there? No, I don't think I have the language for it. Basically, it has to be a commercial service. Right, so commercial service is as long as it's for profit. That's basically it. If the service is provided to consumer, mobile services are provided to consumers, and whether or not the service itself is interconnected with a public exchange. Now, there's been argument of whether or not the mobile network is technically connected to a public exchange or not. That's an interesting argument to have here, but none of that is being had. Basically, by the FCC, he seems to be choosing a solution based on what he perceives is best for the economy. In his case, he's considering we should not be treating SMS systems as a common carrier because that would allow AT&T and Verizon to block spam. But what about whether or not mobile carriers and services provided, specifically SMS, through that, whether or not that is effectively the dumb pipeline that just transmits information versus a service that is provided on top? That's what's missing here. Now, I don't believe that this will be, even if it's litigated, I don't believe this will be something that there's a chance in overriding. I do believe that it is up to the purview of the FCC to make those determinations. They can determine what is Title I, what is Title II. You do not have to agree with it. I believe that this position today is wrong. It's wrong not only because you don't have that ruling that something is Title II and a common carrier does not prevent us from passing legislation that actually would prevent SMS spamming. We have a lot of legislation that prevents calling, robocalling. We have legislation that prevents spamming on email, some measure of it. So we can actually, even though something might be determined like phone calls and communication over phone line like faxes, that while we determine that phone companies are common carrier, nonetheless we can actually employ laws to try to stop or combat spamming in various forms as much as possible. So I don't buy the idea that the only way to fight spam is to give the networks as much power as possible to determine who's permitted to send a text and who is not. But nonetheless, I'd like to have seen a real discussion by the FCC about the law and why the law is written by Congress, as dictated by Congress back in 1996, unless Congress wants to come back and revise it for the modern day. Why isn't a mobile network effectively a commercial mobile network and thus required to be considered a common carrier? And why is an SMS, which is basically nothing more than a transmission of data from one person to the next without any real intervention by the network itself, why does that not actually fit from a legal perspective as a common carrier? Anyway, let me know your thought. Let me see what you're thinking. Do you think that SMS is a service provided on top of a network and such can be regulated directly by the network that's providing it? Or should this be regulated by the government? Should the government be in a position to say that you are not allowed to discriminate against individuals, against companies, unless there's a specific legislation that tries to stop some bad act, some bad event that we determine should be stopped? Let me know your thoughts. I'm going to go through all the comments now. Again, make sure to put, if you want me to read your comment, put an @YouTuberLaw before your comment. I will read it. I'm skipping over anything that doesn't have that. It just tells me, I have a little orange box that tells me to read your comment. So if you wrote a comment and didn't put an @YouTuberLaw, go back, copy it, and just repost it, and I'll make sure to go through it. Big Yehuda, I hope you're well. Sorry I haven't been on many live stream. Always missed you. I've been busy or too exhausted. I'm exhausted again. I just wanted to say your videos are very interesting. Always participate. Thank you so much, Big Yehuda. Heidi Williams, I work in healthcare technology, and we're starting to have issues with cellular and broadband company throttling is because they know we have no choice but to pay for the upgrade. That is true. There's been studies on the matter. I can tell you it's true in my own city, where forever we've had basically a monopoly of a single company that control all internet access. Now we're starting to have a little bit competition, but it's nowhere near basically because one company has access to all the roads and other companies have to find ways around it. So most of us don't really have any real competition when it comes to internet services. More than that, and it was true already back in the 1930s, which would led to the original Telecommunication Act of 1934, and it's been true ever since, that especially when you are going outside of the main urban areas, that when it comes to all communication, to mobile services and to internet services, there are one, maybe two players that are providing those services. They are effectively monopolies, sometimes oligopolies, but really monopolies in the provision of services. And as a result, they are able to control who has access to the services and at what price. And that effectively is the problem, that you are giving them an ability to discriminate, and they have done so in the past. Do you consider self-regulation by industry the only way for industry to grow? If that's the case, then, you know, you have to argue that's true also of Facebook. You know, Facebook, you might, a lot of people are angry with Facebook, the way it handles data, the way it fails to protect your data, what it tells you it does with it. You know, there's a lot of shady things happening within Facebook, but ultimately, if we believe that industry should self-regulate because it's the only way for innovations to move forward, then it's true for everybody, right? We shouldn't regulate Facebook. We shouldn't regulate any sort of privacy rights for individuals. I think that when it comes to communication, when it comes to SMS also specifically, and not just internet or just general mobile services, these have become ubiquitous services, and at the very least, there need to be some regulation of protecting our access to the very services, mainly protecting our ability to use the internet. I know that many of you believe that we need to place regulations on the companies that sit on top of that, right? Your Facebook, your YouTube, your Twitter, because you see a lot of discrimination, a lot of barriers to entry, or sometimes people being kicked off or getting demonetized off of those platforms. And I hear you. I believe that we should not be discriminating. We should encourage speech on all the platform. Nonetheless, I think that we have to start by saying that there should be no discrimination in access to the very basic services. So no discrimination. Obviously, in phone services, we have it right now. No discrimination in mobile services. No discrimination in SMS. No discrimination in internet access. Once you start protecting the pipeline, the access to the services, you can start saying, well, you know what? We want to protect access also to the services that sit on top of that, you know, and then you can get into interesting conversations on at what point the government steps in and starts regulating freedom of speech. That's normally a matter between individuals and the government, but also between commercial entities and private parties, whether or not that should be regulated. But the biggest problem I see right now is our unwillingness to protect just our access to the very services that we all rely on. A lot of the studies that have complained about the companies writing in support of treating SMS as a common carrier were based on healthcare issues, services that are billed to provide emergency services and hospital that would like to rely on SMS, but today cannot because there is just a lack of consistency, unless a lack of trust in the services, because sometime without any notice, without any knowledge, these networks can actually prevent either the sent or receipt of SMS, and you would never know. And if you're relying it for emergency purposes and that never arrives, that can cause a problem. Unicorn Sprinkles, hello from Miami Beach. How you doing? Super Iron Bob, do you think having a classification other than Title I and Title II to cover ISPs in SMS scenario, which are more complicated than just dumb data pipes? That's actually an interesting idea. You know, can we do something else? Can ISPs be treated differently than your railways, your phone system? Because again, it's hard to make that argument that somehow the internet is not as important as phones, but I can argue with you that, and I mean, I would concur with you that it's not quite that simple, that a phone system at its heart is a very simple thing. You pick up the headset, you speak, it's being transferred. With data, it's a very, very different because of the way the system is actually built and the fact that there's so many different ways to communicate. Sometimes it's between you and the specific server, just going back and forth. Sometimes it's between you and people. Lots of little services built on top of it in a way that we just didn't have with the phone service. So I can see that. I mean, but at its heart, and I don't have a problem saying that maybe the government should not be regulating, but there could be a Title III, for instance, which are services not directly regulated through a government agency, but are subject to certain basic laws as set by Congress and on which private individuals have a right to file lawsuits, rather than saying that it's a government that will bring charges for violation of some telecommunication act, actually giving individuals the right to sue those companies, saying that their rights have been trampled upon or been breached. I can argue that where they're saying, you know what, we just want to make sure that there is, you know, uncensored access to basic services that we over time determine is critical to our society. And then you can say, you know, SMS mobile, internet access, stuff like that. I'm sure over time there'll be more and more, but not really empowering any specific government agency to be the police of those services, and they're not passing a bunch of regulation those companies have to follow. That might be a solution to it. It's probably a good idea. Commissar Keck, what are your thoughts on the class action lawsuits against Bethesda for Fallout 76? Everything I read, it says that there is no class action lawsuit, just a threat by some law firm that makes those kind of threats every day of the week. So for there to be a class action lawsuit, at the very least there'll be one individual who actually is engaging a law firm, and that law firm has to believe that it can bring in enough people so it's worth their while. A lot of law firms just talk; it becomes advertisement for them. So is there a case? Well, yeah, I don't care what your terms of service say, what your EULA say. If you are providing a faulty product, and the only way for me to see that it's faulty is by actually installing it, you cannot then say the minute you install there are no refunds. That's not going to be considered a conscionable provision within the contract. So I do agree that there is a case there. I do agree that it will never make sense for any one individual to file a lawsuit against Bethesda, because there's just no money in it. You're trying to get your $50 back. It's going to cost you more in terms of a lawsuit. Even a small case court, you're looking at a few $100s for filing fees. So there's no way for you to really get any satisfaction out of it. So a class action lawsuit is appropriate here. I hope that Bethesda fixes itself very, very quickly, understands what happened here, changes its policies, issues refunds, and protects the goodwill that people may have toward it. But if that does not change, there probably will be enough people to actually push for a class action lawsuit. You know, it's I'm not somebody who believes that no matter whatever you put in your EULA, in your terms of service, that is binding. It's not binding to put a provision that regardless of the quality of the product, you can never get your money back. It's like saying I can sell you a car that doesn't work. Of course, you cannot know that it doesn't work until you put the key in the ignition. But guess what? The minute you put the key in the ignition, there are no refunds. So you can see how that is never going to be held out in court. But what I think that Bethesda should fix its act and avoid a class action lawsuit here. Concrom Gaming. Hey, I caught live. Cool. Excellent. Nice to see you. Or at least not see you. At least speak with you. Red Risotto. You have to pop your Triskel, or your live stream just look wrong. My Triskel. I always forget the name. There's my Triskel. Hey, Red Risotto. Mario Kitsumi. Hi. Glad I caught you this time. Has there been any updates from the Sargon case, or is it this normal time frame for a lawsuit of this nature? It is absolutely not normal. This should have been resolved in terms of the motion, which is a motion to dismiss, months ago. But I first sent it on Twitter, and I actually talked about it, I think, last time. What happened was that the judge on the case got a promotion. Trump actually moved him to the appellant court, to the circuit court in the federal circuit. As a result, there is no judge anymore in the case. And and I've been looking at it regularly, I think I looked at it yesterday, they haven't actually assigned a new judge, and that's what's going on. It's just stuck because the judge in the case moved on and got a better job at the appeals level. So basically we're waiting for the system to appoint a new judge and just to restart this. The means of destruction. Is there any existing precedent for phone lines for folks with hearing impairments? I believe there may be existing SMS functionality related to this topic. I do believe so. That's something I would have to check, but I do believe that part of the notion of common carrier is that you cannot discriminate against people with disabilities, and hearing is an acknowledged disability, and the pipelines have to provide means for third-party services that would allow people with those disabilities to actually communicate. And I believe that's in fact is the case. I'm just not aware of that because it's not a topic I've looked into it before. It's a very, very interesting idea. But I do believe that's in fact is the case, that I don't necessarily believe that they themselves have to provide those means, but I believe that they have to provide means of connecting third parties so they can provide services. So third parties can provide services that would work off of the communication networks to provide means of communication to hearing challenged. Heidi Williams. It sucks for us because our patients' lives rely on us having access to their medical records, and the ISP slows us down if we don't pay extra. And that will just continue. I mean, bottom line, there is nothing. Let's look at it from the other perspective. I mean, ultimately, what's the idea behind not supporting net neutrality? The idea is that what's happening to you is a result of a lack of competition, over regulation. If you remove regulation, there'll be more companies willing to invest in the lines, in the last mile basically access to the hospital, creating more competition will bring down prices, better services. But in effect, we didn't see that. I mean, you have to understand that it's not as if we had net neutrality for a very, very long time. It was passed in 2015 and died in the early part of 2018. It wasn't as if it existed for a long time. And we didn't have a lot of competition. That's just, if you follow the history of the internet, what happens is first there was just a very, very few companies providing internet access. Ultimately, that broke down into tons and tons of companies providing it, and then consolidation. That's really what we have now. We've had now for quite a while. Basically consolidation, because it just doesn't make sense to invest. It's very, very costly to invest in those lines, and it's not because there's too much government regulation or because it's common carrier or not. That's not the reason why new companies are coming into a city or not. There's other barriers to competition within cities. You know, whether or not the city is going to give them access to essentially pipelines beneath the streets. Can you tear down the streets and put your own lines? Can you have access to cellular telephone poles where you can install your own receiver and you can actually communicate with people? There's lots of little barriers that are either in the industry itself, where there's a barrier to competition, where somebody owns the pole and doesn't want to give its competitors access to those poles, but the city will not allow new poles to be installed because it tries to prevent basically just too many poles and just ugly poles everywhere. So there are barriers. I don't see it as directly being tied to this one issue of whether or not an ISP is ultimately a common carrier. But nothing is going to change unless either truly you have competition, and for that to happen, something else. It seems to me that the industry on its own is not geared toward greater competition when it comes to delivering data, whether or not it's through phone, SMS, mobile services, or internet, or government regulation that somehow encourages competition or prevents discrimination, one or the other. Unfortunately, the FCC disagrees with me. Marine Peppelman. Given my limited understanding of SMS and some quick Google foo, SMS is a functionality subset of GSM standard that has backward compatibility in modern standards. As such, SMS would be part of the actual data routing since it is the standard of encoding text for transmission. However, the implementation might be different now. It might be more like VoIP, which is more of a service on top of a network. That's an excellent question. You know what? And I'd love to see an argument based on exactly what you're saying, actually breaking down the services. Now, I've seen it from people from commercial services arguing essentially for the regulation of SMS, but I haven't seen it from companies opposed to it to explain, look, this is how SMS works. Are we more of VoIP? And I agree that VoIP is effectively a service on top of it, and as such is not a common carrier. It's just a service tacked on top of the pipeline. But whether or not SMS effectively is a network that actually transmits data, or is it just, voicemail that's tacked on top of it? That's a kind of argument you're looking from the FCC, because it should be able to explain to us why SMS is otherwise different than voice communication, and why they don't think that it should be protected, and rather it's a service on top of it where information is being transmitted. Because normally when you think of information services, you think of websites, right? Once you're on the internet, you are communicating with the website. You either send information to them or they're sending information back to you. The argument being that the website is an information service. It's not a telecommunication service, and as such should not be regulated by the FCC. Could be other regulations, but not by the FCC and not as a common carrier. On the other hand, there's the argument of whether or not The actual voice communication is pure communication. It's not a service between you and the network. It's just a pipeline between 2 points, between two individuals. So that's the argument. The law is not written in more details than that. But bringing in experts to actually discuss how SMS works and how it might be different than voice and how it might be this way in the past, but this way in the future, that'll be interesting. The problem is we're getting this kind of like this very surface level statements from the FCC saying we need to make sure we don't regulate SMS because we want to enable AT&T and Verizon to stop spam. That cannot be the basis. That has nothing to do with the law. Might be why you want it, but it has nothing to do with what the law actually says. Commissar Keck, thoughts on the Apple App Store markup case? I am not familiar with that. I don't know of any sort of App Store markup case. I apologize. Will Kincaid, if the FCC isn't beholden to anyone, why are we bothering to even talk about this? Good point. They are beholden, right? Because ultimately this is a government agency and the people are always the same, but the people at the top that are effectively managing it, they change over time. They're somewhat they're not evenly divided. You know, I forgot how many commissioners. It might be 7, where it's 3 from the minority party, 4 from the current party in the White House. So you're right. I don't think the FCC. Sorry, it's my opinion that the FCC is empowered to make decisions on what is Title I or Title II. I've never argued that legally they've made a mistake in their decision, mainly that they somehow are not permitted. There's currently a lawsuit, we reviewed it a few weeks ago, that actually says that the FCC did not follow the law and made a mistake in how it actually ran the process. As a result, they are legally required to do it over again. So they're asking for a do-over. I disagree. I think that the FCC has the right to make a decision. It has the right to make what I would think is a wrong decision. The reason why we're talking about it is because it's directly tied to elections, and people can vote for people and vote for an administration and argue against it, and people can try to lobby their congressman, their president, or anybody else to change things, and that's why. So. And don't forget that the chair is one individual. We don't know what's the position of the other, I think, 6 people on the commission that govern this, and whether or not they'll vote along with him on this matter. So everything we say and everything we do, and the reason why we argue, is to potentially create an impact, you know, on the people, on the commissioners, on the way they would vote, whether or not they even want to take up the subject. Maybe they will consider it's not even worth taking up the subject and move on, because frankly, up until now, they don't have to do anything. It has not been regulated. If the FCC does nothing, nothing happens, because nobody has ever said that SMS is regulated. People have been lobbying for it to be regulated, but it has never been. So really the easiest thing from a political standpoint for FCC or for the president to do is to do nothing, which will leave it the way it's always been, which is basically unregulated. Super Iron Bob, thank you for your thoughtful answer to the Title I, Title II question. Thank you for the question. It was a very good question. Mr. Giggs, I bought Fallout 76 for £18, and even if it turns out to be pretty bad, I won't feel bad. Expectation versus price paid should be pretty equal, in my opinion. I see what you're saying. Look, there's a lot of stuff that I pay for and I end up throwing away. Weird, right? Because I try to do the best research I can on the matter, but sometimes I buy something before anybody else research it, or there's not enough people. Sometimes I buy it, everybody likes it, I think it's garbage, and I lose money. Try to get my money back. I don't. I let it go. I'm personally just not somebody that pushes that much to get it, because unless, look, if it was $1,000 item, if it was a large television costs me a great deal of money, yeah, I'll make more of an issue over it. But if it's something that costs me 10, 20, 30 dollars, you know, not as much. So I understand what you're saying. The problem is that if nobody pushes back, take your $18, multiply it times the tens of thousands of people that bought that, and now you understand how much money is being taken out of the economy and given to potentially a company that produces garbage. You are supporting bad products, taking it away from people that could otherwise be placed toward more productive sources, toward companies producing products that actually work. So I think there is, if you want to talk about a greater good, there is a need to make sure that funds, when it's cumulative and spread over a lot of people, is not directed toward non-economic means, which basically is supporting companies that are producing bad products. There's better places for them to be targeted, basically toward video games that actually work. So I can see people being upset. I can see people that say, you know, they need to fight back to get money. It's not because they're trying to get the $18. Guess what? If you get into a class action lawsuit, out of your $18, you'll be happy to get 18 cents out of it, because all of these class action lawsuits benefit mostly law firms. That's why these law firms make these big announcements. That's why, by now, guarantee you there's probably a handful of websites basically calling on people to submit their names toward a potential class action lawsuit. There are law firms that build their entire business soliciting people to complain about just about every single company, because they know that the law firm, if they manage to get a class action going, if they manage to be the lead law firm in a class action lawsuit, there is a great likelihood that they will make money. People make pennies on the dollar. So I'm with you. I think that that as an individuals, we're not likely to get anything back, and if we do, it's going to be a very, very small amount. So why would we do it? Are we trying to support the law firms? No, ultimately we try to place pressure on companies, first of all, to do the right thing, and when something doesn't work, to acknowledge it, take it on the chin and give the money back, and at the same time, you know, make sure that money as a whole is not given to non-productive means, such as broken products that otherwise don't work. Cons Clansett, American with Disability Act to the rescue. Yep. Commissar Keck, thoughts on the HR 7115 80% receiver ban? I have no idea what we're talking about here. HR 7115. What are we talking about here? Oh, about 3D firearms. I just don't know about that. It's just not frankly, it's just not a topic that I've looked into it. I support people's rights to carry guns. I don't live in it's not something I need for protection, and it's not something that I enjoy as a sport. So it's not something on my mind. If this is something you want me to take a look at, send me a message on Twitter. I'll take a look. John Taylor, I think you're spot on. The barrier to entry for smaller ISPs is cost of infrastructure and not regulation. The issue is, you know, forget about the government, whether or not it's regulated or not, and whether or not net neutrality. Let's forget about all of that, because this is my bit of my own way of looking at this. I don't believe that most of our lives are impacted by what happens in Washington. Yes, it does tangentially on the edge, but ultimately we're impacted what happens in our own city, in our own community, maybe to some extent our state, but our lives are very, very local. So it makes for an interesting discussion what happens in Washington, but ultimately that's not impactful. And ultimately, at least I don't see a major impact today on the regulation of net neutrality. I'm more concerned about what you exactly say. How do we improve entry to competition in cities? How do we make sure that if there is underground pipelines that been laid, years and years ago, through which internet is passing and being provided to people. How do we make sure that competitors get access to it? If the city gives permits to build poles for mobile services, how they pass regulation that says, you know what, once you build it, you have to give equal access to everybody else. How do we encourage it? Should the government provide some incentives for communication, recognizing that there is a problem of a lack of lack of competition within the communication network, the modern communication network, not in the phone services? And can we provide some incentives, because ultimately the infrastructure is incredibly expensive, and you don't get your money back except over a very, very long term. And there might be some inefficiency in a market that says, you know what, I can't find investors that want to invest in pipelines where they'll get their money over the next 20, 30 years. And as a result, we need some incentives from the government so that it makes more sense for private investors to join in, because they can make their money faster. That's a kind of discussion needs to happen, because that can have an impact on our lives much, much faster than whether or not there's a new FCC chair and what crazy idea he comes up with. Conclanceth, SMS could be argued to be covered under the American with Disability Act. Yeah, but I mean, if you are not disabled, it doesn't. So I'm in agreement with it might be, but I think we need a generalized regulation that say that access to SMS should never be interfered with unless you don't pay your bill. But otherwise, based on your region, you should not be paying more or less based on who you are, what you say. The network should not be making decision based on the content. Even if my content is vile, they should not be in a position to regulate my ability to speak, because it's a major communication network. And all that they are being hired to do is pass that communication. They are not providing any service on top of it. They are just basically transmitting my communication to the recipient. So that law, which deals more in people with disability, which makes a reference to whoever asked the prior question about access to people with hearing disabilities, that's probably true. But I think we need something a little more, at least, we need more research really on how big of a problem it is, because if you ask companies that have a financial interest in regulation, right? One of the companies is a mass marketer whose business is actually to send massive amount of SMS on behalf of its client, whether or not it's to directly to client to request it or as marketing basis. I accept that what they're saying is valid. I don't think that they're lying. But then again, it'd be nice to see research that is independent to say, you know what? This is how often these networks actually discriminate based on the content of SMS. This is how many people have been prevented from sending SMS. This is how many healthcare institutions are not investing in emergency messaging through SMS because of the concern that their message will not get through. We have some evidence that it's happening. The question is how widespread of a problem it is, and I just don't know that answer. Mario Kitsune. Thanks to you, I now work in a law office, mainly compiling case bundles ready for trial tribunal here in the UK. That's outstanding. Congratulations. I hope you enjoy it. I mean, ask a lot of questions. Try to get yourself involved in as many weird projects as possible so you get access to a lot of different things. See what you like, what kind of areas interest you. Law is so massive that there's probably one area that just about everybody would find interesting. It's just that area is very, very different. Some people like very, very unique kind of criminal cases. Some people like, very, very esoteric tax cases. And there's a lot of things people are involved in. So just explore different areas. Red Risotto. Carriers are worried about the value of their infrastructure. Voice is more complicated than data. If everyone used hotspots, the carriers would die. Who benefits by this? I don't disagree that they are worried. I mean, don't forget, everything was controlled by the same phone service networks, right? I mean, they were the voice, they were the data, and it's once it got separated from them and they became dumber and dumber pipelines. Voice used to be considered, high tech. It's not that much high tech anymore. It's not considered to be, or at least not when it's provided directly through a phone line. A lot of people have dropped their landlines and used their cell phones a lot less for voice and more for data, or at least voice through various services not directly associated with phone lines. So I see that as a problem. I'm just not particularly concerned about it because we've seen industry die over and over again, and I don't see a need to save a dying industry here. I don't think that anybody needs to protect AT&T and its access to and its ability to make money off of its pipeline. The concern should be, well, where is our economy going, what it's relying on, and if AT&T is not providing the services needed for us in the next 20, 30, 100 years, then let it die off naturally here. So I'm in agreement with you that they're concerned. I don't think anybody's out there is concerned about whether or not your job is lost tomorrow, the industry you work in is going to die tomorrow, or your particular job within the industry is going to be superfluous because technology and robots are going to take over whatever it is that you are doing. So I'm not concerned about companies dying. I don't think the government should be concerned. That's at the heart of the problem. We spoke about Article 13, Article 11. In the EU, it's the government's concern about who survive. Should traditional companies that have been the source of information for the past 200 years, should they still survive today? Not necessarily. We don't, as a community, we don't owe anything to newspapers the same way we don't owe anything to AT&T and Verizon. If you don't innovate, you don't manage to invest for the future, you should take on whatever the consequences, including the death of an industry or the death of a company. John Taylor, how about in places of low competition, large infrastructure data is forced to lease lines at controlled rates? John Taylor. I agree. I mean, that's really is the heart of the problem here. That often you have a single pipeline, and then you have your competition is not competition in the pipeline, but rather in the services provided to people. So everybody's leasing it. So the idea is, should there be discrimination in the leasing of the lines? Now, if under net neutrality, that would not be permitted, because the pipeline would then be, the single pipeline would be a common carrier, and they'd be required to lease it to every single service provider at the same rate. So, competition would be even-handed here. The problem is, should you go even further? Should you be able to should the government be in a position to tell them, you're charging too much? We had that when with the 1934, with the entire regulation of Ma-Bell and the whole AT&T network. The law did not only prevent, the FCC not only prevent the discrimination when it came to access to long distance line, but also the rates. And I believe AT&T had to actually show the FCC its rates, and it had to be accepted. So do you want to go to that level where the government in Washington is making decisions about what kind of rate is appropriate in rural Nebraska? I mean, I think that we're asking too much of a federal government, that it's something it's not capable of doing. If it does it, will do it badly. And even though it might seem attractive, we're asking for more trouble than it's worth here. But basic statements like, you cannot discriminate, that we can work with. But, the problem with high prices, there is nothing you can do until you find a way to encourage competition. And that's not an easy way to do it. Because ultimately, like people said, it's massive amount of investment, and you're going to recoup it over a very long time. How many investors want to do that. They want to invest in a pipeline where they'll have to make their money over the next 20, 30 years, and they don't know if 10, 20 years down the line, that pipeline is even relevant anymore. Maybe it won't be. So it's a huge amount of risk upfront. The payoff is in the past, in the future, but the risk is more immediate. So I can see why there is a disincentive among commercial enterprises to invest in those pipelines. But it's in those cases that government can be really helpful. And I know this is not something the United States has done very well in the past, and some of the Asian countries have done a better job at it, is to recognize that sometimes there is market inefficiencies because we need something to happen, but there is no private investment in it willing to do it. And so there could be some sort of public-private co-investments. As long as private money is coming in, the government invests along the way in order to mitigate some of the risk. There's a lot of risk from it. You know, we've seen a lot of money being wasted when the Obama administration gave a lot of money to green technologies and they all died off and everything was lost. So there's not a big appetite for that, but it can be done well, even though we have not always done it very well. John Ferguson, there is other data beside internet data being transmitted on the high-speed data network. It would be difficult to have some of the data subject to net neutrality, while other data is not subject to net neutrality. Managing such a network would be very difficult. That could be. I'm not aware of that information. I don't know how that would be managed. It could be that it's easier than you think because companies know essentially who their clients are. So it's not discrimination based on data, but based on the clients, right? And so regulating, you know, whether or not somebody has access to the net or somebody, or what kind of prices they're getting charged. So it might be a very complicated problem with a very simple solution to it. I'm just not aware of that. Patrick Lonergan. There's a new lawsuit going on with Apple about the App Store monopoly. I'm not aware of that. I'd have to take a look at it. I remember some grumbling about this idea quite a while back, maybe a couple of months back, that this idea that since it's the only place where you can buy apps, it is a natural monopoly, one where really there can't be anybody else. Effectively, well, it's not a natural monopoly. It's actually it's an unnatural monopoly because Apple controls it, doesn't allow any other competition. As a result, you know, it controls pricing by taking let's say a 30% cut. As a result, it's unnaturally high prices, doesn't allow for discounting. That was grumbling. If that's the kind of case, I would have to take a look. If you have some information on it, if you can send it to me on Twitter, I'd appreciate it. I'll take a look. Maybe we can talk about it next week. Phil Harwell. Is it legal for me to publish sale of parody without getting permission from the content creators? I'm under the impression that it is, but I'm not 100% sure. You're starting with a conclusion, so I'll go with that. If it's a parody, then you don't need permission from anybody in the world. You can choose to give credit. You don't have to. Nothing requires you. It's not a moral issue. I disagree with a lot of people that say, you know, you should be doing it. I don't care. You don't have to legally to do that. But let's assume that it's a parody. And just because you think of it as a parody, it may not be a parody, right? Because ultimately, the only way to discover if something is a parody is to have a lawsuit and have a judge determine if it's a parody. There's no easy way to do it. But assuming you've looked at it, you considered all the ins and outs, you consider it to be a valid parody, you know, a humorous look at what they're saying or about the people themselves who are saying it, or the subject matter is what they're looking at, or if ultimately that's what you've concluded it is, then you don't need to give any you don't have to ask permission or give any credit or anything like that. Will Kincaid. So let's say I have the president's number and I call him for a favor to fire somebody. Can he fire Ajit Pai, what's the procedure? I don't know the president, but I know a guy who knows. Yeah, I mean, the president can remove them. He doesn't need permission to remove people on his board. What generally happens is nobody gets fired. You never ever see somebody fired. Basically, you ask for their resignation. Nobody stays on the job without the president's approval. So you've never heard of somebody being well, you do hear people being fired. That's not true. But the answer is yes, that he has a power. He's effective. This is essentially the executive branch. He's effectively in charge. He can, through procedure, fire people. He does not directly fire people, but there's a process by which he fires people, but it's not a complicated process. But normally, once you fall out of disfavor, you are then being asked to leave, and then you resign. That's usually what happens. Cam Crum Gaming on supporting bad product. You mean like the mentality of fans to buy a bad game from a company to support the company and the quality keeps dropping while the fans keep buying? You're right. That part makes no sense, but there goes my entire theory. You're right. I'm assuming that people are buying bad games based on bad information provided, that it is otherwise a good game. So, or at least in the beginning, until they hear enough information about it, they buy it, like pre-sales, and then they learn on their own that it's bad. But yes, if there is other reasons why we buy bad games, like herd mentality, my neighbor has it, he hates it, but he has it, and so I'm going to buy it, then I don't feel bad about people getting their money back. You're right. At that point, the problem was with the purchase, not with the refund. Mr. Giggs, I agree regarding Fallout. I bought Elder Scrolls Online release day, and it took 1 year to get good. Now I've put 2,000 hours in, perhaps in more lenient and understanding than others, I guess. I can appreciate it. I'm assuming that the reason why you did it is even though you saw a lot of flaws, there's something in it you enjoyed, probably the storylines or the promise of what's coming. There's a lot of those kind of video games, right? That I wouldn't say are bad, but it taken longer than anticipated to get to a point where people are enjoying it. I don't want to get a lot of hate comments, but that's what we get with Star Citizen, right? That there were expectations that often were not met, and it just took a longer time to get there. And people, because of they were supporting the promise what's coming down the future, and they saw improvements over time, kept with it and put more and more money into it. So I can absolutely appreciate fans actually staying with it and supporting a company. The question is, and I don't know because I didn't play Fallout 76, largely because I heard everybody, I've spoken to it to my kids about, the reviews have been so bad, there's no chance of me buying just to try it out. So the question is, should people stay with it because there is something great there? It's just the execution today is bad and it's going to get better over time? Or is it a bad product that's just not worth investing time and energy? And it's up to every individual to make a decision. Ryan Brown, even some phone companies are becoming essentially VoIP. Verizon was forcing an upgrade in my area if you wanted to continue service, phasing out their old copper lines. That's true. I think that was the case with what's happening here. No, I can still get copper line phone, but even AT&T is all pushing you to upgrade to VoIP services, which is interesting because the service to you might be the same, but the minute and you have the same phone number, it might work the same, and it's provided by the same company. When it's down, up and up. You don't really know the difference. But suddenly you went from a service that you cannot be removed off unless you don't pay the bill, to a service where if they don't like what you're saying, they can actually cut you off. That's a very interesting dilemma because they're actively pushing for the retirement of an old technology, and as a result, that'll be the end of common carrier when it comes to voice communication. It's a good point. V for Vendi. How you doing? Maureen Peppelman, isn't there actually an obligation for the ISPs to invest in the pipeline since they got a whole lot of money around 1 or 2 decades ago, specifically to build the infrastructure? I don't know what companies, okay, I don't know what the deals were when they had government support. But as far as I know, there is, I don't know of any current deal that will require them to invest, and that's part of the problem. And it's more than that. It's not about AT&T not investing in its own pipeline. The problem is that there is no competition in it. That AT&T came to your community 30 years ago, laid down pipelines, and it's reaping some benefits out of it. And over time, it's upgrading and adding more capacity through. They also have access to those underground networks, something that competitors don't have. The problem is that they're doing it at their own timeline, you know, and they can charge whatever they want because it's unregulated. And the problem is that there is no competition. So you're right. Part of the problem that when the government, the FCC, was talking about is, we encourage investments by those large companies that otherwise don't want to invest because of regulation. My concern is I want more competition, and it's not regulation that's hampering the next internet provider from laying down pipes in your city. It's because it's just too damn expensive, and there's a high risk here, and access is expensive, and they may not have access to the underground lines, and they don't have access to the poles. But ultimately, it's investing in a technology that they don't know will be needed 30, 40 years down the line. So how do you improve competition? How do you encourage new companies from investing in pipelines, whether or not they're mobile, satellite, or lines down? How do you encourage competition in access? That's the biggest hurdle here. V for Fandin, since you are on the topic of a business dying off due to not being used, I know you are probably tired of hearing questions about platform being shut down, but part 1. Hold on. Let's say that another mainstream platform causes interference with another upstart platform by threatening a payment platform such as PayPal. Can that be seen as unfair competition? Okay, so let's put some examples to it. So let's say, you know, let's use example, right? PayPal told Gap they don't want to work with them. As a result, they caused damage to Gap. What if another platform like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter basically pressured PayPal to do that? Could that be seen as anti-competitive? Could that be then a case for antitrust? If you can prove it, the answer is yes. That would be classic anti-competition, but that's very, very hard to prove because you don't usually get cases like that. You don't usually get cases, you know, there's not usually, you know, a bunch of guys in smoking cigars in a room talking about how to undermine a competitor. You do this, I do this. You don't get that, you know. So to prove something like that, you have to be able to show something. You need some evidence for that, and generally that's very hard to come by. I'm not prone to conspiracy, so I don't generally think that's what happened. I think that what you have is lots of companies making decisions that are similar. They're all looking at each other, making similar decisions, not because there's a conspiracy among them, but, you know, they're seeing PayPal may not have had the courage to do this on their own, but once they saw reaction from other more mainstream, high-profile companies, basically not wanting to deal with other platforms or other service providers, they then did it themselves as well. So I just don't think that there's any evidence of collusion as much of, you know, all them acting by looking at each other and doing the same thing, not because they are colluding toward a specific goal. But yeah, if you can actually show evidence to that effect, actually say, you know, emails, video, you know, witnesses, stuff like that, then you've got a case going. I hope I didn't skip anybody here. Red Risotto, I'm sorry, I will try again. I didn't explain myself well. SMS point-to-point does not pay as well as voice point-to-point. If nobody uses voice, difficult to justify prices. Oh, I see what you're saying. That SMS is very cheap. That is true. I mean, I'm just telling you what clients have told me. I had clients that have run a lot of services off of SMS even before we had smartphones, basic stuff. And the idea was that SMS used to be a huge moneymaker for the phone companies because there's virtually no cost, and they were able to charge so much because they charged based on how many messages were being sent. So it used to be a massive source of revenue. And that's where actually competition works, because once people start providing unlimited, because there really was no cost to it, that entire stream of revenue died at all. It completely. So you're right, they're making money off of voice packages, not necessarily SMS. But to me, and just by looking at the market, they're making their money off of integrated packaging, not as much as how many minutes of voice. All of that died as well. It'll be all unlimited, basically voice, data, SMS, anything they can throw at you and then create packages. So as long as they are providing some service like data, right now it's the data, right? That's the big competitor. That's where people are paying for. I think much more than even voice, just pure data. I think that's what's driving the price. So I think there's a recognition already that voice is dead, and I think at least I haven't seen it on my end. Maybe in other parts of the country it is, that the companies are not charging anymore by the minute or how many minutes they're giving you. It's pretty much thrown in there, and it's all about the data. And that at some point will get packaged as well. It'll be unlimited data, unlimited minutes, unlimited texting. That's pretty much T-Mobile provision. So that's where competition is going. Everything is commoditized, and it's all about price competition, where whoever has the lowest cost structure wins, basically. Unicorn Sprinkles. Don't forget to like this video. Thank you so much. Yeah, please like. Mario Kitsune. So far, had to work on a couple of assault cases, but mainly employment ones, unfair dismissal and contract violation, but it's really interesting and learning a lot. Outstanding. I hope you enjoy this. Will Kincaid. Cool, I gotta make a call to Texas in the morning. Go to sleep. Mario Kitsumi. You need to put... Oh, yeah. Guys, if you want me to read, always put at YouTuber Law. Otherwise, I don't know you asking me to speak it. John Ferguson. If you want Lior, again, start with at YouTuber Law. Thank you so much. Red Risotto. 200 characters is not enough to get my thoughts across, but I enjoyed the streams and all the questions answered. Cheers. No problem. I apologize if I'm not answering the question you want. It is very short texting. Half-boiled hero. Love your stuff. Do you mind me asking where you studied? I went to, depends what you're asking. You can always ask. I have my bachelor's. I have a bachelor's in economics out of Brandeis University. I got also a master's in international finance there out of the International School of Business. And I got my JD, my law degree, out of Stanford Law School in California. And Silva. If I sing my own funny lyrics about politics using the background music from a popular song, is that a parody? Okay. Let me start by telling you what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to monetize that video. It's either through the content ID, they're going to take it down because I'm assuming you're playing the melody in the background as you're singing it, because that's going to get caught by the content ID. So either they're going to take away your monetization, or they obviously can issue a DMCA and actually issue a strike on you. They're going to be very, very aggressive. They're not going to be worried at all of whether or not it's a parody or not. So that's just the actual implication. Music industry doesn't care. They'll take you down and then they'll fight it afterwards, and if you're right or wrong. So is that a parody? A parody will kind of depend on the content of it. Is this a parody of the song itself? So there's definitely been cases on it. The most famous one is the 2 Live Crew song that included within it a few notes out of the song "Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison. His company sued 2 Live Crew, and saying that everybody knew that those few da-na-na-na-na-na-na, right, very few notes is actually associated with his song, but ultimately 2 Live Crew won because it was in fact a parody. That was clearly what, and even though there was a recognition of that song, it was a parody. The problem is you want to play the entire song. There it was, they used a segment. They wanted to effectively be a parody of his song, but it wasn't his melody in the background and their voice. They used a small segment. The more you consume, the harder the argument. I can't give you an answer. Nobody can give you an answer. You can get it to an attorney. He can give you a legal opinion, but it's just that. It's an educated opinion. It's not necessarily, it's not binding by any stretch. It's not true or not true. So the answer is there's been cases saying what you're saying is a parody, but in practicality, that's not the relation between YouTube and the music industry. And I can guarantee you the Content ID is going to catch it. They're either going to demonetize it, which is the most likely thing, and they're going to take away, meaning it will be monetized, but in their favor, or you'll receive a strike for that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that that's the implication of it. Will Kincaid, that are your thoughts on Thought Audit? That nobody should be reporting anybody else to authorities about stuff like that. I don't know why anybody would do something like that. You might be opposed to people, disagree with them, upset at what they're doing, but the idea that people should be reporting content creators or other people online to the IRS because they suspect that they might not be paying their taxes, I think that we have better things to do than tell on people. I don't think that snitching on people is, the way to go about it. And Silver. Okay, I think I just answered that. Eric Ahim Ezel. Another thing with copper line, they continue to work if the power fail, making them historically the most reliable in emergency. Their failure to maintain the infrastructure damaged it. That is true. I mean, living in Florida and being subjected to hurricanes here, absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing we always knew we had access to was the phone line over copper lines. We don't have that anymore because our phones come through the internet. Basically, it's old now VoIP. But then again, we don't rely on that. Our biggest concern now, truthfully, is mobile, because that's really where everybody gets. So it's the mobile networks is what happened on those poles and everything else. But you're right. That was the most reliable form of communication. Marlene Peppelman. And we're back. Kerbal Space Program caused a kernel panic and my PC crapped in itself. Nope, hell nope. What are your thoughts on migrants rushing the border? I'm sure this is a can of worms you don't want to open. I think that this is not about the bigger issue about immigration and everything else. This is just about that particular instance. I think that we are always required to enforce the law, and the police, the border patrol had to stop this, no matter what. That no matter what your general feelings are about immigration or about the people coming toward our borders, you cannot. There's no effective way to argue that you somehow should allow a mass rush of migrants, regardless of who they are, to rush our borders and come in. Without getting into sensitive political history, we've had that before, and especially down here in Florida, the results are not, if not historically, we're not good at it. So no, you have to protect your border. Captain Q, I see that you tried to write YouTuber law. For some reason, it didn't work. It didn't pop up a square. I don't know why, because I see that you wrote it. But it's discuss thought audit, please. The reporting of premium Snapchat of that's exactly what I just did. I think that it's not a proper thing to do for anybody to snitch on anybody else. We are not we are not enlisted by the IRS to tell on people. I know that there is this small loophole that if you tell on somebody and the IRS, collects millions of dollars, you'll get a percentage of it. But it's not a job. It's not our civic responsibility to tell on people, to report it. Plus, you really don't know what somebody else is doing. You suspect, you think, you are concerned. But based on that, should you be reporting people to the IRS? No, not in my opinion. V for Fendi, this is off topic, but is it legal to serve someone via email if they are overseas? Also, thanks for answering my last question. I was just curious about it. Is it legal? So the answer is you have to go to court to ask effectively permission, and you have to show why that's what's needed. There is the Hague Convention Protocol, which tells you how to serve people. So just the same way you would serve them in the United States by either engaging a private company or the local sheriff to serve somebody, there are mechanisms to serve people abroad that start with you actually utilizing the local police or the local sheriff, whatever it was locally, whatever the local means of actually serving people. If not, there are ways to do it by mail. Email is the last one, and you have to explain why that's needed. And usually it's only after you've proven that you've been unsuccessful in other more traditional attempts. It's just not, they've done that when they've been able to show that the other individual have successfully evaded service, but they are actively involved on the internet. We can see them posting on Twitter. We can see them be involved. We can see that they're showing up, but we cannot effectively serve them. So if you can prove that, that has been done. Will Kincaid, thank you, thank you. As day as man. You don't think people should be reported for a crime? You don't know what they're doing. You have no idea what someone is doing. Look, if somebody went online and said, I did X, Y, and Z, and it's a crime and you feel it's your civic responsibility to report it, by all means do it. I have no problem with that. What's happening here is people thinking that people are not reporting, assuming that they're not reporting. It's look what they're doing. They must be making money off of cash being sent to them, not reporting it. You have no idea. I think it's completely inappropriate to tell on people when you have nothing to tell except suspicion. It's like, when you're watching somebody, however offensive you might feel their content is, you have no idea how they manage their money, what they're coming in, where their income is from, how much taxes they're paying, whether or not this is a major source of income or it's really a tiny one, whether or not they pay any taxes or not. None of that It's all assumption. So no, I don't think it's appropriate to tell on people. This is the way we did it in kindergarten. And Silva, I've been banned in the past from PayPal, eBay, AdSense, Facebook ads, and WePay, all using my personal name. Can I open a company and use these services again, or am I screwed for life? Absolutely, open up a company and do it. There is general language that says you can't, but it's not legal in many ways. Once you read in the detail, it's not legally binding. The way I would do it, I would set up a company. If you're married, I would put my wife as the CEO. If not, ask your mom, your sister, something else like that, because you often have to report on the individual. It is absolutely a valid thing for you, for companies. Like all these accounts allow for companies. You can be an employee of that company even though you own it. So that's how I would do it. Lapco 92. Corporations generally don't like laws. Congress hates to work and many are indebted to corporations. The deadlock is our main problem with internet regulation. I'm completely with agreement with you. We've spoken so many times, but these laws were written 20, 30 years ago. Sometimes they just don't make any sense, but you don't have an effective Congress who actually sits down and actually passes laws. The most common thing that's over the last 10, 15 years is no compromise. So everybody elects congressmen and senators who just believe in zero compromise, just in their position. As a result, nothing gets done. Everybody screams, you call everybody in front of some subcommittee, you're talking about what's happening, but nothing effectively happening. Everybody wants their moment in the sun, screaming because CNN is showing what you're going to say. So you're going to get good rating. Maybe you'll get some support back home, but no real work. We got a completely ineffectual Congress. You don't have to like what's happening in the EU, and I can understand. I mean, I think there's a lot that the EU is doing that is just over-regulating their own economy. It's going to lead to a downward spiral for a lot of their companies. I don't think, but I can appreciate that they're actually doing something. What a small thing that your legislature actually does something, actually passes some law, some decision is actually being made. We got a completely ineffectual Congress. So basically we're relying on two branches of government because we don't have a third. We just have two. We have the court system, whose job is only to interpret what Congress has done. So they're trying to interpret sometimes law 20, 30 years old that have to be applicable today, and as a result, they're limited in what they can do. You know, everybody wants the court to act in a certain way, but they're just not able to because they can only interpret the law as written by Congress. And you've got the executive, the president, everybody's screaming at him. But at the end of the day, their obligation is actually to execute on the laws passed by Congress. Your problem is in Congress. It's not the executive or the judicial. It's Congress. You got an ineffectual Congress that never gets anything done, and it doesn't matter if you get a party that a single party to control everything, or you get a divided Congress. They have no ability to work together toward any sort of compromise. Red Risotto. If thoughts are flopping their boobs around on the web service mainly used for streaming games watched by kids, hunt them all down. Okay, it's opinion. As day as man. I for sure don't know what they're doing, but I see someone doing something shady. I'm going to alert an authority. I'd want someone to do the same if somebody broke into my house. I agree with you if somebody broke into your house, but what they're doing does not impact you, and you don't know. If you thought that they broke the law, given what they are actually doing, what you can see, I can appreciate that. But that's not what's being discussed here. People are looking what other people are doing. They might like or not like what they're doing, and then they are deciding, well, no, they must not be paying their taxes. Let's call the IRS and report them. I don't see the connection here. I'm sorry. John Ferguson. I always tip in cash, and I tell the person that if they somehow forget to report the income to the IRS, I won't say anything. We all do it in cash. We leave it. It's up to the person receiving to report it, not for us to report it. And I don't go out of my way to assume that the person is doing it or not doing. I give the tip. It's their responsibility. Eric Hayim Ezel. My thought, it's a witch hunt targeting a taboo group. I doubt many are even reporting. They're getting sick chuckles off of getting away harassing a group that isn't well regarded. I don't even think that the IRS cares about this. They're getting some anonymous reports with zero evidence to look into somebody. I can't imagine they're spending 2 seconds on this kind of information. I find it problematic that people feel that they should be doing it. Again, I don't know if they're actually doing it or just saying that they're doing it. But I don't think the IRS is responding to any of this stuff. I don't think. Bottom line is the IRS cannot respond to things that are not worth a lot of money. So they're not going to respond. If you told them, you know, this guy is hiding $2 million in a Swiss bank account, that will pique their interest. But telling them some content creator may not be paying money because because you've given them, you've sent some money their way, that's not going to get them interested. LabCode92, excellent analysis. Thank you. Marlon Peppelman, thanks for all the answers and explanation. Thought Audit is just a faster clock of pettiness, trolling, and self-righteousness. Unfortunately, it's just trending legal issue right now. I agree. V for Fendi, can laws passed in the EU for the internet eventually affect other countries? Since you are on topic of the EU, I've been hearing a lot about it, but not sure. The answer is it impacts everybody because it's the laws as they're looking into it is based on who's viewing. So arguably, if you're in the US and you want your content or viewed or consumed within the EU, you're subject to the same rules as they are. So immediately, because the EU obviously is a massive market for so much of the world, it will impact everybody. I don't think other countries are going to rush to do what the EU is doing. I think that's going to be unique to the EU, but I do believe that it will have an immediate impact on everybody. As day as man. Someone not paying taxes does affect me, though. Taxes fund the country I live in. But you don't know they're paying or not. That's the key here. I'm not saying that. Absolutely. If you know that your neighbor has been storing money in a unmarked Swiss bank account and you feel you want to report him, I'm not going to argue with you. But when people are talking, I don't know. Again, I'm looking at what people are saying online. They're making accusations based on about people that they don't know, based on the fact that they don't like them, and they use that to report. Again, I don't think anything ever happens out of it because I don't think the IRS will waste their time on it. But I don't approve of just saying things to authority because of nothing more than suspicion without any sort of evidence. MT Redux. It is like if I watched a Twitch gamer and decided I did not like him and then reported him to the IRS in the offhand chance that he is not paying his taxes. It's pathetic. Yep. Otaku Reborn podcast. I get where you're coming from. It's like saying you're reporting a comedian over a joke assuming is real. Good point. Erica Himazel. Oh, I meant the people claiming to report, not the IRS. I think they're just doing their jobs. LOL. No, I understood that it's possible that nobody's actually reporting anybody. They're just saying it in order to scare a group of people into it, so they're saying that they're doing it. I get you. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I don't. Concrum Gaming. Do Good Samaritan laws essentially protect reporters who essentially are harassing people through false flag reports? We don't really have a lot of Good Samaritan laws, and they don't impact that at all. So there's very few states with Good Samaritan laws, which requires us to act in a positive way. And if we don't, we're somehow liable. There was, I believe, in Vermont or New Hampshire, but they're very, very limited. So we just don't really have those. As day as man. I don't know they're not paying taxes, but I'm just flagging them with HMRC and they can look into it if they think it's worth the time. Okay. I think we are done. I think we're almost finished here. John Ferguson, my father always said what you don't write down, the IRS can't subpoena. Not a bad advice there. I think we are done here. We are, well, a little less than 2 hours here. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate the conversation, comments. You don't have to agree with anything I say. You know, it's a free country, but I appreciate the discussion. As always, if you have anything you want to say, any concerns, anything you'd like to discuss, just leave them down below. I'd love to talk to you. I'll see you next time.